What's up guys, Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. So in today's video, we're going to check out a new extension that I'm super excited about for creating arrays of objects on faces. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so I saw this extension get released the other day and I was super excited to give it a try. So Curic Face Array is basically a tool designed to array objects along faces. So basically what it does is it takes objects and it repeats them along surfaces, but then it'll also automatically trim them in order to make them fit along the surface. That is super powerful and also just a lot of fun. So you can go download it from Curic's website, which I will link to in the notes down below. Note that you can download it for free right now, or you can name a fair price and make a donation or pay for it, or however you want to look at it. I do want to note Curic has noted that this is to raise awareness for victims of the flooding in North Vietnam caused by the typhoon Yagi. So I don't know what this means. I don't know if there's any kind of like donation or anything like that, but at least from like a raising awareness standpoint, I did want to make sure that I noted that. But when you download this tool, basically you want to install it like you would any other extension, and then we're going to open it up in SketchUp. So the way that it works is you get this little toolbar right here, right? So you install it by going to extensions, install extension, and installing the tool. And then you click on this button right here in order to activate the menu. And so if you look at this, there's a bunch of interesting things going on in here. First off, if you click on the folder, there's a library of a couple different presets in here. So let's say, for example, we were to take the brick bond. Notice what that's going to do is that's going to open this up and then allow you to mouse over a surface. And so when you mouse over a surface, this is going to show you the surface that it's detecting, that it would repeat this along. And then you can click in order to start placing the object. And so when we look at this, note that this has different colors on your screen. And so those different colors are indicating objects that are inside of the bounds of your object and objects that are outside the bounds. And there's a couple options down below which we'll take a look at in a second. But for right now, let's say that we were to just click on this surface and then hit the enter key. What that's going to do is that's going to take this object and it's going to use that profile right here. It's going to repeat the profile, and then once it repeats the profile, it's going to cut it or trim it based on the surface that you're on right here. So in a lot of ways, this is similar to that old floor generator plugin that used to exist that got taken away, only I feel like this is more powerful. And so one cool thing about this is this works not only with rectangular shapes like this one, but also if we were to select that pattern again, it's going to work with other shapes as well. So if I run this on this circle right here and then I hit the enter key, what this is going to do is this is going to generate this object and then it's going to cut it using the boundary of this object. Now let's take a look at a couple of the options that are down below. And this time we'll go ahead and we'll select one of these other patterns. We'll pick the chevrons right here. So if I click in here, these chevrons are going to repeat. Well, if you look down below, notice how there's an option for overlap. So what overlap is going to do is it's basically going to create an overlapping copy of these objects, right? So if I was to hit the enter key right now, that's going to basically place this using the bounds of that face, but then anything that like overlaps the outside, it's just going to create it, right? And so say that we undo this and we're going to run this again. So we're going to click on this. We'll click on the chevrons right here. Note that there are options in here to move this object. So if I move this, notice how this is adjusting where that base point is, and I'm just clicking, moving my mouse, and then clicking again. Now, there's two other options in here which we'll take a look at in a second. There's a rotate, and then there's this set spacing, which doesn't actually seem to do anything right now. I don't know if I'm using that wrong or what, but we can use this in order to adjust this. Now, I do wish there was a scale option in here as well. That would be nice because you can't really adjust the size of the objects, at least that I've seen at the moment, meaning that you need to make sure that you draw the objects that you're going to repeat to the correct size. But now, say that we were to select the option for inside, what that's going to do is that's only going to place the objects that are inside the bounds of the surface, right? So if I hit enter now, notice how even though it would have had additional copies around the outside that it would have cut, because we clicked on the option for inside, it's going to place it basically right on the inside, right here. And so notice that this is going to work not only with rectangular shapes and circular shapes, but it's also going to work around objects that have holes. So, for example, say that we were to pick this third option, the herringbone, click right here. We want to make sure that we've set this to trim, and you can kind of move it around if you want to using the box right here. But when you do this, when you hit enter, notice how it's using that whole surface to cut this object. Well, what that means is that you can use this for objects that have multiple different holes inside of them, like this. One thing I would recommend is when you run this tool, I would probably save before you run it, just because it's working with a bunch of geometry. I've actually not noticed a whole bunch of instability with this tool, but it's just kind of a good practice to do that. And so one thing that's really cool about this is not only can you do this using the preset objects that are in here, you can also use your own objects. So say I was to create a little disc like this one. What you can do, instead of clicking on a face and then picking a preset pattern, you can also do a shift click. So you can select a face and then an object. And if you scroll down, notice how there's an option to array the object like this. That is super powerful because you can use your own profiles in here in order to basically create these repeating shapes. So notice how I can move this around like this. I can hit the enter key. That's going to basically array your object and then slice them using the bounds of this face. And so you can use this with components. Just note that all of the circular shapes that are getting cut are getting made into unique objects, right? So if I go back in here and I adjust this component, because I did place these as components in here, notice that it is retaining the component functionality for the ones that aren't being modified in here. But every object doesn't stay a component. Now, note that you can click in here and you can actually adjust this layout, which is like mind-blowing to me, right? You can adjust the layout, hit the enter key, and it's going to replace these based on that location. Now, there's some interesting applications for something like this. So say, for example, that you wanted to use different components, right? So I'm going to create a copy right here, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to make this one unique. And then we'll make 2 more copies. So just like this, we'll make this unique, we'll make this unique. Note that you can use nested components in here. Now, I'm not sure if there's a limit to the number of components that you can nest or not, but if I take all of these, right, and make them into a singular group and then run this, note what that's going to do is that's going to repeat the group with the nested components in here. Well, now if I hit enter, remember that this is a different component than the others, and so is this. So we can use this to do some really interesting stuff right here with creating those repeating objects on a face. So this is especially powerful, but I do suspect you're probably going to use it most for things like walkways and repeating tiles and things that repeat, right? You'll probably use it a lot for flooring. But let's say, for example, that we had a concrete tile in here, and I think I made this 4 foot by 4 foot. It doesn't really matter for what we're doing right now, but I can select this surface, do a shift click to select this and array the object. Now, note that there is an option up above to adjust the angle. So if I type in a value of 45 degrees, it's going to rotate all of those objects 45 degrees, like this. You can also come in here and you can click in order to set your own rotation if you want to do that using this little gizmo right here. So I'm going to rotate this, but if I hit enter, what that's going to do is that's going to take this, it's going to place it on the surface, and then it's going to trim it, which is pretty awesome. Now, let's talk a little bit about creating objects that repeat. So I've downloaded this kitchen model from the 3D warehouse. This is the just kitchen from Jorge Corral, I believe. But basically what it's got is it's got a surface in here for the backsplash, right? If you look at this, this backsplash face is in here. And I'm gonna go ahead and cut this out because it looks like it's not actually been separated in here. It's just all right, we're just gonna do this real simple. I'm just gonna draw a rectangle across the surface like this, just to split it out. But what I've got is I've got some different tile options in here. And I'm gonna go ahead and hide this faucet for right now. But what I want to do is I want to take this object and I want to place it in here. And one thing you might do is you might close this while you're selecting your faces. Now, one thing that's going to be important though is the axis orientation of your objects. And so say that I take this tile and select this surface right now and I click on Array Object. Notice what it's doing is it's arraying that object so that it's standing up on your surface, right? That's not what we want. And so it's important to note that the object axis orientation is important, right? So these two right now both have that object axis running in this direction. What you want is you want the blue direction running perpendicular to the face that you select. So we're going to use the axis tool right here. So we're going to pick axis, and we're going to set this so that the blue orientation is actually facing out. And we'll set it up here just so we can see it a little bit better. So now that blue orientation on that object is facing out. Well, if I run this and select this, and then we run this object, notice how that object is facing correctly for the most part. So the green direction was this way, so that's why it's placing it that way. But we could just scroll down, set our angle to like 45 or 90 degrees, like this, and then it would run the proper direction. And if I hit enter, it's going to come in here and it's going to repeat these objects. Now, one thing to note about that is you might want to place a little bit of spacing. And so if you decide that you want to place a little bit of spacing, what you could do is you could set this to 90 degrees right here. And then I might set the offset on this to be like 1/8 of an inch. And notice how you can see the axis directions right here by looking at this little corner. But what I want to do is I want to set this so that it has like a 1/16 of an inch. So we'll say 1/16 of an inch spacing. Well, notice how when we do that, we're going to get a little bit of a gap between our tiles. So we could do the same thing in the other direction, right? So we could set this to a 1/16 in the Y direction right here, and then hit the enter key. Well, notice how when it creates this now, there's going to be a little bit of spacing between our tiles. So if you're looking for that like visual gap in here, you can use this in order to do that. Now, say that you really like this, you could go up and save it, right? So if you click on Save As to Library, and we're just going to call this repeating rectangle. There we go. So now, if you scroll down, notice how the repeating rectangle is going to show up in your library right here. So you can use this to save these. And so in addition, I'm going to go ahead and delete that one out for right now. You can also use this to set repeating shapes like this one over and over again. Now, you can definitely do this, but one of the things that you might think about doing is right now, for example, if I use this object, right, I'm going to click on Array Object. I can actually mouse over this surface right here and click, and you can kind of see how this is going to repeat. So we can see immediately we need a 90-degree rotation. But notice what this is doing is this is taking this object and it's repeating the block in here like this, so just over again. But the problem is this doesn't nest nicely, right? So what you would do is you would go into the offset X direction right here, and specifically when we want to set this in the Y direction, you're going to set this so that you have a negative offset, so that every time it repeats this, it's not repeating it by the full bounds, right? It's repeating it by the half of the bounds. So in this case, that's going to be -2 inches right here. And in this case, I think we just want it to be the offset X. So we're going to type in -2, and then we're going to be good to go. I do find setting this up this way, I don't really understand why X has an X and Y and Y has an X and Y. That's a little bit confusing to me. But if you play around with it, especially for shapes like these, then hit the enter key, that's going to go ahead and that's going to repeat this in here. So it's going to work pretty well. But you can go back in and edit that layout, right? So for example, if you wanted a little bit more of a gap, you might say, okay, we want this to be -2 1/8 in order to give us that gap, and then hit the enter key. So when we do that, that's going to create this, but it's going to give us a gap between the objects that are created. So overall, super powerful tool. I will say the more complex your shapes get, the harder it is to get this repeating to work. Like, it's definitely doable, but a lot of the time what you end up doing, right, is you end up taking an object like this one and actually kind of like pre-setting the spacing in here a little bit in order to make this whole thing work. So you may have to play around with that a little bit, but overall still a super powerful tool, and I'm super excited to play around with this. All right, so that's where I'm in this video. Leave a comment below. Let me know if you've tried this out, if you're excited about it. I know I'm pretty fired up about it, but I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.